The Intercollegiate
Psychedelics
Network.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Michael Gomez, and thank you for coming to my presentation on Inclusive Learning, a discourse on undergraduate psychedelic education. And so the psychedelic renaissance has sparked a revival in psychedelic research over recent decades, leading to the establishment of many research centers dedicated to the field. Unfortunately, sometimes these opportunities don't often extend to undergraduate students, as psychedelic courses at the undergraduate level are very scarce. And this is a concern because we rely on undergraduate education to create the next generation of psychedelic academics and leaders. Ignoring undergraduate students in the movement could hinder the progression of psychedelic studies, as many students only gain the foundational knowledge in their graduate studies. Furthermore, we need to develop curricula that reflects the interdisciplinary nature of psychedelia and promoting holistic learning experiences at the undergraduate level. Such a curriculum should encompass Indigenous perspectives and histories related to psychedelics to protect marginalized communities and to potentially inspire innovative clinical designs. Despite the lack of discourse around psychedelic education, it's crucial to create the next generation of psychedelic scholars. A well-designed educational framework is needed to maximize the benefits of psychedelics while carefully considering the impact on marginalized communities. And this presentation aims to explore how to integrate psychedelics into undergraduate education and how it can benefit undergraduates overall. Introductory psychedelic education at the undergraduate level is highly limited. For example, speaking anecdotally, at Harvard, I took a course at the Divinity School focused on the cultures and histories of psychedelics called Psychedelic Spirituality. And unfortunately, it was a one-time offering. And we have a similar course called Psychopharmacology, Your Brain on Drugs, but they only briefly touch on psychedelics, missing their therapeutic potential. And this limited exposure to psychedelics in college often leaves a lot of Harvard undergraduates, including me, seeking external resources and guidance. And this isn't just a Harvard issue, it's widespread across many universities. I consider the following list of institutions that offer undergraduate level courses on psychedelics. Despite an extensive search on the internet for hours and hours, this handful of courses of institutions is all that I found. And while there may be a human error in finding these courses, just the difficulty in finding them reflects the shortage of undergraduate psychedelic courses. And so in conclusion, there is a significant gap in educational opportunities for undergraduates that want to learn about psychedelics. The lack of undergraduate exposure to psychedelics can hinder the field's progression. Typically, undergraduate years are when students explore various fields, helping them set their academic and career paths. Studies even suggest that exposure to specific study fields can influence students' chosen majors. Therefore, limited psychedelic education might result in losing potentially interested and skilled students to other fields. On top of that, introducing foundational psychedelic topics at the graduate level results in wasted time that could have been more productively used during the undergraduate years. This delay in exposure reduces the productivity in psychedelic education and potentially stifles early research advancements. Currently, psychedelic courses are limited to a few institutions, as seen by the list in the previous slide, and many other opportunities come with substantial costs. This situation creates inequitable access to psychedelic education, as only those at certain institutions or those who can afford expensive courses have access. Therefore, we must establish education opportunities for students interested in psychedelics. Such exposure can inspire students, equip them with necessary tools, and enhance productivity in the psychedelic field. Furthermore, it can address issues of inequitable access and limited innovation, which currently result from restricting this information to post-baccalaureate opportunities. There's clearly a lack and a need for undergraduate psychedelic education, so it is important to develop a plan for how we should tackle this problem. First, we must recognize and acknowledge the problem, which this presentation is attempting to do. From there, we can go on to develop solutions to this problem. The next thing we must do is define a curriculum that would be productive and beneficial for undergraduate students. This is step 2, and I'll also attempt to cover this through this presentation. From there, we must advocate for undergraduate psychedelic education on a larger scale and amplify students' voices. And then from there, we can then collaborate with a multitude of educators and academics in the space to refine and reform the curricula and create more inclusive opportunities to learn about psychedelics. It is important to note that the last 2 steps are beyond the scope of this presentation, as they require extensive organizing and group work. But just some thoughts for the future. Before discussing a specific framework for undergraduate psychedelic education, it's important to consider the established purposes of undergraduate education in general. Roy White Chan from Indiana University, well, he was from Indiana University, and he's currently at Lee University, outlines 2 key purposes: preparing students for the workforce and creating contributors to society. Historical higher education, he argued, aimed at creating public service leaders and advancing knowledge. But today, it must also prepare students to meet workplace demands and participate in the global economy. This dual mission is relevant to psychedelic education as there's a balance, as we must balance skills related to employability and knowledge that may make students more socially aware. These ideas are also reflected in public opinion, this dual purpose. A 2011 Pew Research Center survey revealed that 47% of people believe college should teach work-related skills, 39% endorse personal and intellectual growth purposes, and 12% advocate for both. So there's a somewhat even divide between these two main schools of thought. And therefore, in creating a curriculum, these societal demands must be considered, as education inevitably influences society, whether through skills or values. We can also look to the work of Craig E. Clafter from the American University in Myanmar. He argued that the real purpose of undergraduate education is maturation. He asserts that a rising number of students entering higher education exhibit signs of immaturity, like entitlement and inability to accept criticism. This perspective introduces the concept of maturity into psychedelic education, asking us to define what maturity means in this context. In conclusion, higher education should serve a dual purpose: creating informed citizens and to prepare students for the workforce. Additionally, the concept of maturity is essential. The question is, what type of individuals are we striving to shape through curricula? With this general framework of ideas, we can further discuss the purposes of psychedelic education, how it should influence the curriculum. When discussing the objectives of undergraduate psychedelic education, it is essential to align with the primary goals of undergraduate education: creating well-informed citizens and preparing students for the workforce. And here's how these objectives would manifest in the context of psychedelics. Workforce preparation requires fundamental knowledge in neuroscience and psychopharmacology, as most contemporary psychedelic research focuses on these substances' effects on the nervous system. However, it's also important to note that as the field evolves, with recent work exploring the immunological aspects of psychedelics and also the gastroenterological aspects, the curriculum must adapt accordingly. Understanding clinical protocols and legal issues is also critical for preparing students to operate within the framework of clinical trials. A class could provide this foundational knowledge, but it is equally important to supplement this with practical research experiences. Furthermore, preparation could extend to clinical trial design, including methodologies and placebo designs informed by cultural and historical uses of psychedelics. Traditional uses of these substances could also inspire the set and setting of psychedelic trials, potentially enhancing therapeutic benefits. Lastly, the creation of well-informed psychedelic citizens involves understanding the historical and cultural context of psychedelics. There's been a renewed interest in the indigenous history of psychedelics, which have also been referred to as entheogens, acknowledging their religious use. Organizations like the Shakruna Institute highlight these indigenous voices and histories and emphasize the importance of including such perspectives in the psychedelic space. As we explore the development of a curriculum for psychedelic education, it's crucial to acknowledge a frequently overlooked aspect: the indigenous histories and use of psychedelics. Indigenous communities worldwide have used plant-based psychedelics as part of their spiritual practices for centuries, long before the rise of psychedelic usage in 1960s America. The Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, co-founded by Beatrice C. Labate and Clancy Kavner, works to bridge the gap between ceremonial use of sacred plants and psychedelic science, with a strong emphasis on including diverse voices. Their anthology, Psychedelic Justice Toward a Diverse and Equitable Psychedelic Culture, presents different perspectives, challenging the traditional science narrative. One such perspective is offered by Dr. Diana Negreen in her essay, Colonial Shadows in the Psychedelic Renaissance. Dr. Negreen, a scholar focusing on culture and human geography, highlights the ecological and social vulnerabilities resulting from the resurgence in interest in psychedelics. She argues that the expansion of psychedelic usage can lead to scarcity, as evidenced by the slow growth and over-harvesting of peyote. Western commodification of indigenous lands and resources for authentic ceremonies further exacerbates these issues. She calls for respecting and incorporating indigenous perspectives and ensuring environmental protection and cultural education of indigenous psychedelics to decolonize the modern psychedelic movement. A further perspective is offered by Lopez et al. In their essay, Mazatec Perspectives on the Globalization of Psilocybin Mushrooms. They suggest that Western researchers should create forums for dialogue and discussion with those who have been developing therapeutic traditions with psychedelics for generations. In essence, there's a resounding call for greater inclusivity in the modern psychedelic renaissance. The exclusion of indigenous voices from the scientific process echoes the historical patterns of colonization and oppression experienced by indigenous communities. It's important to recognize the importance of psychedelics in indigenous spirituality, and to acknowledge the potential ecological damage of psychedelic globalization. Ignoring the wisdom and knowledge accrued by indigenous communities dishonors and invalidates their experience and contributes to ongoing systems of oppression. To truly advance in the field of psychedelic science, it is crucial to incorporate indigenous perspectives into psychedelic education. In devising a new curriculum, it's beneficial to examine existing programs. The University of Wisconsin-Madison's master's program in psychoactive pharmaceutical investigation provides a comprehensive interdisciplinary curriculum encompassing drug development, program management, clinical application, and in history and humanities. Their core courses span from legal structures for controlled substances to neuroscience of psychedelics, illustrating the spectrum of scientific, legal, economic, and humanities knowledge required in the field of psychedelics. This is currently the only master's degree program focused on developing psychedelic-related skills, leaving room for the creation of an undergraduate curriculum that introduces students to key areas of the psychedelic field. We can use the notion of interdisciplinarity and the camps introduced to help develop an undergraduate framework, as these camps can each fall under one or both of the two purposes of undergraduate education. Furthermore, literature on general psychedelic education is very limited. However, one noteworthy piece is called Psychedelic Medicine, Creating an Introductory Course for Mental Health Professionals and Trainees by Pruitt and Sloshower. Despite being psychiatrists and educators at Yale with a focus on therapeutic applications of psychedelic medicine, the course they developed was intended for professionals already in the mental health field, not for undergraduate students. And while this may limit the article's direct application to undergraduate education, the broad range of topics covered in the course highlights the interdisciplinary nature of the field, providing valuable insights for the development of an undergraduate curriculum. Furthermore, in March 2022, Joey Lichter published an article on the Open Foundation website where he interviewed 3 professors, one from Stanford, one from Ohio State, and one from Maastricht University. It is titled Psychedelic Professors on the Rise as Universities Expand Courses on Psychedelics. When he asked them about their key learning outcomes for students, their answers emphasized critical thinking, interdisciplinarity, and intellectual engagement. These educational concepts are useful in developing an undergraduate framework as they are useful in informing the objectives to keep in mind. Keeping in mind the purposes of undergraduate education, indigenous perspectives, and existing curricula and opinions, we can now develop a foundation for a curriculum for an undergraduate psychedelic course. Primary topics of interest include indigenous histories and uses of psychedelics. Furthermore, it's also important to highlight the potential and realize disasters of Western influence. This aspect helps promote the creation of informed citizens and societal contributors. Another crucial aspect of psychedelics are the science behind them. The neuroscientific and psychopharmacologic aspects to be taught should be developed in conjunction with the leading academics to ensure that the information is accurate and up to date. Understanding the scientific mechanisms underlying psychedelics helps prepare students for the academic or industrial workforce. Lastly, it is important to teach ethical and legal frameworks under which the psychedelic space should operate. This last topic of interest can help create informed citizens and societal contributors as it allows students to explore morality applied to a psychedelic use context. Furthermore, it can also help prepare students for the workforce, as they can apply the principles to the regulatory process of a psychedelic lab or company. Now, while this framework has the potential to be beneficial in developing more established curricula, there are some limitations to keep in mind. First, there are time constraints. There's only so much one can teach in a semester. So it brings up the problem of whose stories do we tell? Whose history do we teach? Whose science do we promote? Since an undergraduate course tends to be breadth focused rather than niche, it is important to give students a toolkit by which they can apply to multiple scenarios. For example, teaching how to read through a scientific paper on psychedelics and being able to evaluate it, both find its flaws and successes, is more beneficial than teaching a very niche scientific finding. Similarly, the course could equip students with tools to explore indigenous histories, rather than providing very, very in-depth niche knowledge on specific cultures. For instance, the story of psilocybin mushroom healer Maria Sabina being ostracized from her Mazatec community due to her popularization by Wasson could be used to highlight the potentially damaging impact of Western intervention on indigenous psychedelic cultures. And this prism can then be used and applied to many other contexts of psychedelic use. Another limitation is that the field is so rapidly evolving. Scientific findings are coming out left and right. Laws surrounding psychedelic use and research are rapidly changing, as are ethical frameworks for conducting psychedelic studies. For instance, a paper was recently published in 2021 by Pilecki et al., and it provided a harm reduction framework for conducting psychedelic therapy. There are also other institutions currently developing new frameworks, such as a group called Poplar over at Harvard Law. The rapid evolution of the field necessitates constant adaptation of the curricula for the course materials to be up to date. And lastly, this model is rudimentary and needs to be refined through collaboration with educators and academics in the space. While the framework may have some limitations, it is useful, though, as a starting point and a foundation for discourse surrounding undergraduate psychedelic education and the development of a model that can be enacted productively and beneficially for undergraduates. Overall, I believe that the lack of undergraduate courses speaks to the general exclusionary attitude of the psychedelic sphere. For example, there are limited structured opportunities for students to pursue work in this field, such as through industry internships, and education is also representative of this. There are clearly many reasons as to why undergraduate psychedelic education is needed. And in developing such a curriculum, it's imperative for it to encompass the interdisciplinarity of psychedelics to help satisfy those workplace and social demands. There's a lot of work to be done in the field of psychedelic education, and hopefully, my project serves as a foundation and starting point for the work that needs to be done in the field. Thank you very much. If you ever want to talk about this with me a little bit more, or just want to connect, feel free to email me at my school or personal email, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.